Jackson, Mississippi. And if you can imagine an American map, it's the most southern part, except for the Florida part of the United States. It's deep south, as we like to say, which is legendary. Is what Mississippi is like. Maybe what is the poorest state? Is that
it is
true?
The poorest state.
The poorest state in the U.S., which is there's a lot of poor states in the U.S. And when you came the last time, I didn't know so much about your organization, and since then I've been reading about it and etc. And what I like about it is that you talk theory and then you do the actual work. And everybody talks the theory, and it's very hard to do the work, but you're trying to do the work. And I think this is what I hope you can bring to Hungary. And I'm not going to talk anymore. I just want you to both introduce yourselves and tell us about yourselves.
So thank you. It's nice to be able to meet you guys and talk about the work we're doing. So my full name is Sacagawea. It's long, so everybody calls me Saki. It's S-A-K-I. And I was born in New York City. I ended up being in Jackson because of a political organization I was a part of. And in 2014 is when we launched Cooperation Jackson. Our organization and the movement that we come out of is standing on the shoulders of our ancestors and all of the different work that people, Africans in the United States, did for self-determination for Black people up until we've entered the picture. We come out of a strategy called the Jackson Kush Plan. One prong of that is building a solidarity economy towards economic democracy. So that's our long-term overall mission and vision. Because the work requires so much else and so much more, we have different initiatives and different programs that are connected and interconnected with building a solidarity economy. So for example, we have developed and we're hoping to grow our community land trust, where the residents and members of the community collectively run and manage land that is in the ownership of the organization. In the United States, it's one of the ways to make housing permanently affordable. For us, it's not only about having permanently affordable housing, it's about having ownership and community control over land and housing. And so we see our community land trust as the foundation of land ownership, which is necessary for our community to
communal land, but maybe not
communal.
Private,
community land. Which is important for building power in our community and having self-determination. So that's the land part of it, and on top of it, there'll be housing. Right now we have urban agriculture, urban farming, and we're developing worker cooperatives. And really, I like to describe it as thinking and visualizing, envisioning for there to be an ecosystem where we're able to meet our needs ourselves and all the different needs that are available. Healthy food, so you guys, healthy food, not only affordable but quality housing, jobs, childcare. So we started on May Day, May 1st in 2014. And so this past May, we are 4 years old. So we're gonna, we'll talk about the organizing and the work that we're doing. It's still at, early stages. And so there's a lot more that we're aiming and hoping to be able to do with the organization. We're a membership-based organization and a Black-led membership-based organization, and so anyone can be a member of Cooperation Jackson. And at the same time, our organization is focused on Africans who are in the United States, Black people in the United States, African people in the United States. Jackson in Mississippi is a little under 200,000 people, so it's not a huge city. It's the capital of the state. And you mentioned that Mississippi is the poorest state in the United States. At one point, it was the wealthiest state. And Jackson, I guess to simply say, like, started declining, it was majority white, and now it's majority black, around 80%, a little over, a little less, a little over. 80% are black people, and the majority of the black people in Jackson are working class and poor people. And so we really, we know that it's important to center working class and poor people, and those are the people that we are working to organize and to include and to be the ones to set the agenda, come up with the solutions, and develop these alternatives. To rewind a little bit in terms of the land, there's right now in the area where we're focused. Hi. Okay. So our home base is in West Jackson, and Jackson, because of having been divested in and the way that it's set up is that resources, money, people's labor are extracted from Jackson. There's a lot of vacant homes. There's a lot of housing that is dilapidated. I don't know if that makes sense. It's not adequate living conditions for people. And so part of the work in developing the community land trust was to be able to accumulate land, have it be community owned and off of the market. There's a lot of speculation, so people are looking to take advantage of the cheap land in order to build housing and to expand the medical industry that's in the city, universities. So we're located right along the kind of border area between West Jackson and downtown. And the downtown area has both city offices and buildings, the city hall. It also has, because Jackson's the capital, it has state based offices and whatever. And so, we talk about kind of holding the line as we see, and as, it's going to increase kind of the business stretching into and kind of trying to take over land in West Jackson, which means that the people who are there, who have been there for generations, get pushed out. We're trying to, keep that from happening and make sure that there's a space that is community controlled, like I mentioned. Does it make sense to talk about some of the co-ops? A couple of them. I mean, I can name really quickly. When we started off, there were ideas about the different needs that are in the community and what cooperatives could meet those needs. Because the first site where our community center is the Center for Economic Democracy and Development, the property had land in the back of the center, and when the soil was tested, the soil was perfect for being able to start growing, because food sovereignty is really important and a bedrock of our work too, right? So the Freedom Farms urban farming was able to start right away, and that's still in the kind of growing development stages. The building that we're in already had like commercial grade equipment. So, the thought was we could easily have a cafe. The catering part of the cafe and catering co-op is what has taken off in a strong way, and part of that happened because of working together with organizations like the workers' rights organizations struggling to make minimum wage like up to $15 an hour, and being able to support the other organizations in Jackson with providing food. We have the what's called the Green Team Cooperative that's doing landscaping and being able to instead of having what comes out of what you cut go to waste, we're having that be turned into compost. And about, what is it, like 2 years ago now, for the getting introduced to the Fab Lab and everything.
Introduced to it earlier, but 2 years
Yeah,
of pursuing it.
yeah. So for the last 2 years, we've been able to have members go and get training, and we've been pursuing, first thinking about housing and building housing inexpensively, and then coming to know and understand like all the things that can be done with this new technology. So we also have a building that's going to be a fab lab, a fabrication laboratory. So one of the things is like think about 3D printing, and being able to repurpose material in order to like print cup. And so also one of the earlier ones that's like really in the kind of like baby stage is a security cooperative. I forgot to mention that the other day. And so I was talking about this kind of like ecosystem, and within that, the bedrock of being able to build a solidarity economy is having these cooperatives and having the cooperatives be interconnected. And so not only being able to provide services outside of the community, but being able to sustain themselves by exchanging like goods and services. And so one of the things, because we were able to do the Freedom Farms and the catering right away, one of the things that has been nice to demonstrate the goal of them being interconnected is that when possible, the catering co-op use the greens. Like collard greens are really popular in the South. They were able to use the collard greens, the carrots to prepare meals. And then when you're cooking, we don't compost meat, but we compost like vegetables and things. And so whatever was left over from them preparing the meals for the catering goes back, like gets composted and goes back into preparing and providing healthy soil for the produce. And so we're so like it's really important for what we're doing to have those co-ops be interrelated in that way, and for us to be like pushing and thinking about. So we were able to solarize like a good portion of our center with solar panels, which has had a good impact on like energy bills. That's another big thing. It's like utilities are really, really expensive in Jackson, Mississippi, and so it's a struggle for people to have housing and have what they need, like utilities in the housing. And so looking at being able to promote more and more alternative energy and energy democracy. One of the, like from the start, one of the big areas that we've been involved with has been the climate justice movement. And so when we're talking about very explicitly, like ending capitalism and transitioning into a different way of like, not only a different economy, but a different way of interrelating and being social with each other. We are talking about sustainable community development, sustainable businesses, how we produce, how we transport, how we consume goods, being done in a way that protects and hopefully helps to regenerate the planet and protects and provides for people.
So I'm Kali Akuno, also a member of Cooperation Jackson. I want to try to move more quickly to kind of maybe some questions and answers, but to I guess kind of situate our work in both a historical context, which will help explain, at least in part, some of what's going on in the United States in a broader sense. Many people have this impression that Trump is like some madman who came out of nowhere, right? And what we could tell you in Mississippi is that that's not true. There were many people who have been in the political spectrum, political arena, actually wielding power both at the state level, particularly in the Deep South, who make him sound quite rational and make him appear to be quite rational. And one of the jokes that we were saying to a lot of friends and allies and supporters after Trump got elected was welcome to Mississippi. You know, like, so now you all will gain an understanding of what it's like for us to live in Mississippi on a daily basis with the blatant racism, the blatant, sexism, misogyny. Like, you'll get a good taste of that because that is what's been going on basically in Mississippi since Reconstruction, right? And white supremacy. So the critical thing is to don't look at Trump as a social aberration, because he's not. I think it is very important to look at him as a response to a particular phase of capitalism, and to put him correctly in that place, because whoever would have won the U.S. election was fundamentally going to have to renegotiate the terms of empire. That was purely what was on the table. Now, he has a more crass style about doing it, a more brash style, a more John Wayne style of doing things. But Hillary would have basically tried to renegotiate new terms with NATO. She would have tried to negotiate new terms with the WTO and China. That was already more clearly on her agenda than it was his, truth be told, for folks who were paying attention. So it's just a different way of, a different style and effect of how the empire from the U.S. perspective has to be managed. And clearly what he is trying to do, and I would say they are trying to do, they being specifically I think the U.S. ruling class is simplifying the matter. I think there's an international level to that now, but we can talk about that later. But the terms clearly need to be renegotiated. And you hear that, I think, in a much more direct way in Trump's rhetoric about why are we paying for NATO? Why isn't Germany paying its part? These trade rules and this NAFTA is not fair to U.S. companies and businesses, even though that's a complete lie. This trade surpluses with China, and this trade surplus with the EU, and this trade surplus with Canada. It's just terms of renegotiating. Now there's some danger in that that we can talk about, but to bring it back to the local, these, at least the last 30 or 40 years, this is the type of politics that's being perfected on the state level for quite some time. The right in our country, really since the 1964, when Barry Goldwater was defeated by Lyndon Baines Johnson in the presidential election. Goldwater represented really the birth of the new right, as we would call it in the United States. And they had been there all along. But that was the first time they had kind of organized themselves into a dominant position to contend for power. Now, he lost, and he lost miserably. But what he set in place was he really brought in a whole new generation of young minds, young talent, that were committed to a political goal and a political movement, which they built systematically over the last 50 plus years. Now, they had a lot of help from capital. That's the piece that I think is often missing from like our side of the equation. People say, well, how come we didn't do it? Our side of the equation did do it, but we didn't have universities and philanthropies that endowed us, with unlimited money for 50 plus years, right? We don't have a Koch brothers on our side of the equation, dispensing out resources. Nor should we. That's another issue, but nor should we. But they started that program after that defeat really by going to the local level, municipal level, primarily in rural areas, not in urban areas, because they figured the urban areas were too black, too brown, too radical, too working class. So they figured, well, where will our politics catch the most resonance? And it was in small towns and rural areas. So they went in and they made by the mid 70s, they made a real strategic alliance with the religious community, particularly the evangelical community and the Christian evangelical community. And they just formed a good partnership of these are the folks who are already in their communities. They go to church every Sunday. They see them on TV every Sunday or several times a week. They go to Bible study every Wednesday. So if you can start melding a right-wing political agenda with a neoliberal economic agenda, with a white supremacist agenda, coupled with a Christian, nationalist agenda, you got a perfect combination which leads you to Trump, right, over a period of time. And you can see this gradually growing. And to the point where, Trump has been well known throughout all of his public career at being a misogynist, woman hater, women abuser. This is not something that's new. It's not something that's unknown. But in order to attain power, the Christian right basically has put itself in a position of saying, as long as he executes our program, we're actually willing to absolve him of his history and to absolve him of his present actions and statements. This is a politics we saw on the local level in places like Mississippi for a long time before Trump emerged. So a critical thing, I think, just to understand about our strategy and program, Saki mentioned the Jackson-Cush plan, and our own strategy, which we call the Build and Fight kind of program. It was designed to be a program of resistance in very hostile conditions. Right, it's designed for a period like this, right? So there's a certain level of mutual aid, self-help, self-development. That is not always possible in every single context. We understand it, but at least in ours, there are certain areas and certain levels of people who are fundamentally marginal to the system, disposable to the system. There's not a great deal of capital investment in our communities that blocks out us being able to self-organize and self-manage our own projects. Now, that doesn't mean, and we're very clear about this, it doesn't mean that as we build more power, they will just leave us alone. The more power and political strength that we gain, we are trying to be very mindful, both at the level of our strategic leadership, but also at the mass level, of saying we have to build ourselves for a period of both repression and a period of intensive competition to not only either absorb us or to eliminate us as a threat in the market itself, right? So this is not something that we are oblivious to or ignorant of or trying to wish away somehow is going to happen. At some point, as we get stronger and reach the levels that we're aspiring to, there's going to be levels of direct confrontation between us and capital and us and the state. So how we get ourselves prepared and get our communities prepared during this period, I think, is a critical question that our program, we've intentionally, over years of studying before launching this program 4 years ago, tried to study both our own rich history of struggle, but struggle in this field all over the world to try to bring to bear some fruits in the long term at radical social transformation. A part of the thing that, and I'll end here and open it up, another critical piece, just building on what Saki said, we see that there's two major interconnected pieces that we have to worry about, all of us, on the global scale. One is what I would call kind of late stage capitalism, moribund capitalism, turning in on everybody and just devouring all the remaining assets of the state and the commons, the public goods, because that's the last sphere outside of going to Mars that they can basically exploit, given the dynamics, and extract a profit. The other piece that's dangerous about that is this particular phase of capitalism has accelerated the ecological crisis that we are all living through. And I think one of the critical things that the left has to figure out is how do we not only defeat the rule of capital, how do we also save the planet from the sixth major extinction event that we are already living through? So we have an even harder task, I think, ahead of us than some of the previous generations. It was there, but I don't think that the level of consciousness about us stepping off this cliff, or there being a cliff where there is perhaps no point of return, wasn't as clear to some of the previous generations. But from our vantage point, we say we have the benefit of the 20th century and all the lessons, good and bad, of all the experiences, from Russia to Cuba to Angola. We have that, and we should use it as a strength to build stronger for the next round of struggle. So I'll end there. We can ask some questions.
I can just ask the first question. The goal tonight is to get out before 8 p.m., or at least so that people will be free to go see the Argentina game, which is across the street by the club. But my question is, I see your Facebook group or page or website, and you talked about Saki, you talked about the cooperatives and the gardens and these things. What I want to know is, how do you recruit?
How do we recruit?
How do you recruit people to do all these things? And then the second thing is, because if you're going to have a cooperative, is there a legal status for cooperatives in the law? And how do you deal with that? Or is this kind of more spontaneous? And so there's kind of an infrastructural question, and there's a question of how do you bring people into it? As activists, both of you, how do you make that work?
Well, let me just...
Yeah, one thing was to say that, like, when folks speak, we don't probably have time to go around and learn everybody's name, but when you speak, if you can say your name so we can kind of know a little bit about
So there's just basic organizing, what we would call in the U.S. organizing one-on-one. The most fundamental thing is we try to put as many people out in the streets, knocking on doors, particularly in our direct community, both, number one, kind of explaining our program, and then number two, ascertaining what are the needs of the people in the community, right? What do they want? What do they need? What are the problems? What are the challenges that they have? Starting from that basis and then moving to, well, what do you want? What are you willing to build, collectively? And that takes time. And so a project like ours, I think is critical to understand. Saki mentioned it, but we were part of a political project that had been in that community for over 40 years. And they had done a lot of patient organizing in that community on many different fronts. And so I would say at the organization's height, it had a basketball team, it had a soccer team, it ran an arts program, for youth. And the main intersection was, how do we first attract young people who have more energy, more time on their hands typically, to do, kind of more volunteer labor, just put it plainly. But what is the intersection that you meet the children and the parents, right? And it's in these organized kind of sports and cultural activities that you would meet them. And we always made sure that was infused with politics. And then for us, it's also where are the major points of struggle and resistance where we have to confront the forces that are directly against us as black people. And in Jackson, as in many of our communities over the generations, the most critical intervention point is struggling against police terror. Because that's common throughout the United States and has been common as long as we have been in the United States or in the North American settler colonial territories. And so, the organization that we came out of, that was a bed and, what we call a bread and butter issue, that every chapter, everywhere, was rooted in surveilling the police, monitoring the police, organizing self-defense units against the police for when they came into a community or try to raid a community, organizing legal services to protect people who had been, arrested or detained or brutalized by the police. And in Jackson, those combination of activities, I think, probably did the lead over a long period of time of building a solid base for us, our particular orientation of left politics, where people, saw us fighting in the interests of the black working class unequivocally against the broader forces of capital in the state. But you got to be in the community, and for us, the internet is both a blessing and a curse to a certain extent. But, for most of the history, and I would still say in Jackson, Mississippi, folks under 30, they have this, so they can be tuned into, the world, basically. Folks over 30, they typically don't have the resources and don't have the inclination to even deal with that. So in our community has a bell curve, which I'd imagine a reverse bell curve. So there's a great number of young folks, people of working age, their prime working age, they dip and typically leave Mississippi to go to Illinois or Georgia or Dallas, where there's a stronger economy. They go to Chicago or Atlanta or Dallas or Houston for work. And then they come back and retire, when they're about 55, 60, 65. So if you follow the curve, it's like this, much like a third world country, or how I know some of the Eastern Europe to also be going to Western Europe. So we kind of have that dynamic. And, for us, with the political gains that we've won, it's that combination of reaching very strategically and deliberately, reaching out to young folks and reaching out to folks who are elders, and serving their needs at its core to the base building work that we have done. But it also starts with having a clear analysis of who's in the community, and some idea ahead of time through study of what are their needs, what are their aims. But if you don't have a direct dialogue with them, you can misread the situation or misinterpret how they see the world as opposed to how you think the world, that they're living in should be. And so there's a nuance to organizing that you have to pay attention to.
And about the legal structures that make it happen, and how do you?
There's in Mississippi.
Yeah. So Mississippi doesn't have, you cannot have a worker cooperative or any cooperative except for agriculture cooperative, and banking, like a credit union.
Or utility.
There's cooperative utilities, which in Mississippi is not the type of cooperative that we're talking about.
The cooperative's a name.
And so one of the structures that's used in other parts of the country that also have it like that is the LLC. And what's LLC stand for? Limited Liability Corporation. And so people legally register their businesses as LLCs, but have their infrastructure and their bylaws and documents reflect cooperative principles and structure. And so we have Cooperation Jackson. I mentioned the different cooperatives, but Cooperation Jackson itself is the umbrella organization that these pieces are a part of. And so we have an LLC, we also have a nonprofit, and to start with, we heavily function out of the nonprofit organization. And clearly, like, our goal is to be able to be self-sustaining with the programs and projects that we have, and not have to rely on foundation funding. Besides that, we actually have done a lot of successful, like, fundraising, and so we have a sustainers program. People sign up to give, like, anywhere from $500 to $50 a month. And that comes out of it's like done automatically per month. And that's the kind of funds and being able to pull, like, people's resources that don't come with strings attached, that really support the principles and the work that we're trying to do, right? So, yeah, does that answer? Yeah. Okay.
But just to add on,
yeah,
so everybody knows, some states, as Saki was saying, have cooperative statutes. Mississippi does not, because they directly associated that with communism in the 1930s. So there's a political reason why Mississippi does not have a statute that allows for worker cooperatives.
Yeah.
We've been part of an alliance since our beginning that's tried to change the law. And it's inconsequentially through our work in that alliance that we kind of inadvertently discovered the level of state monitoring that was being done against us. Because when we joined that coalition before Cooperation Jackson was born, and I worked in the Lumumba administration to raise the profile of cooperatives. And I had a conversation in my office, in the mayor's office, with a representative from the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations, which is our largest labor federation in the United States. And I only had this conversation with them in my office, no place else. And then was it the next week, the leader of the Republican Party cited my conversation as a reason to not support the cooperative bill, right? Which was like, the only way you could get that information was either somebody in that room told you, or you had a bug in my office, and you heard the conversation. We know which one it was, because it was nobody in that room. I know them well enough. Nobody in that room said anything. So we were just like, okay,
Yeah, so another option that we had that people do is actually register as a cooperative in a different state that does have supportive cooperative law.
Or in D.C.
Right, Washington, D.C., like Wisconsin or somewhere.
Typically it's
like Rainbow is.
It's Wisconsin, D.C.,
there's limits
California
to being able to function within Mississippi with being like an outside entity, though. So all of them except for the urban farming, which can register as a cooperative because it is legal to have an agriculture cooperative, have in
LLC.
terms of like legal status, are LLCs. And for us, there's a separation and a difference between like what's required legally and what we know internally that we have.
And there are times, and we have a few of these, there are some folks who have organized themselves in collectives who are operating cooperatively, but it does not make sense to them to be a legal entity for a number of different reasons. And so that's one of the things is we helping people develop stuff is to ask them, hey, how do you want to do this? Because there's strengths and weaknesses to being registered in one way or another. So what's the most strategic for you? Because from our vantage point, a cooperative is a tool of worker self-organization and democracy. But the form in and of itself can be used by forces of the right just as it could be used by forces of the left. And so, is what does it enable us to do from the left is the key question for us. And, so in our case, like the legality is what is going to help you get to where you want to go. And if it doesn't necessarily, if it's too limiting, or we find other ways, that to make things work. Because in our context, the Republicans are striking down legal avenues to move left and right. So that's just a critical thing to understand. I think that could be helpful here, given what we understand, the way things are going here. Any other questions?
Do you have the option to communicate or maybe cooperate with other similar foundations or organizations in the United States?
Yeah.
Like solidarity economies. One of them I heard of is Springfield, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Wellspring Initiative, I think that's the name. I'm just wondering how, if that's an option, how that works.
Yeah, we actually are in connection with Wellspring. I know them very well. We are part of a national alliance called the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. Matter of fact, someone from our organization will soon be on the board of that organization. The issue that we're having in the United States right now, the most developed sector of the cooperatives throughout the United States are typically credit unions. And credit unions after the crisis of 2008 they're really being constrained and being consolidated, actually, right?
They're having to consolidate.
To like Magnat, Magnat in Hungary, it's the same thing.
Okay. And the federal government is forcing them to merge. And that,
Not a competition, they're doing it too.
not a try, which I think is the wrong thing. Some of them, trying to compete with the big banks are merging themselves, but they're doing this. They're doing all of the wrong things that the finance sector is now in the lead of doing all over the globe. And what we're finding is that the credit unions are lending less and less to communities and less to cooperatives since 2008, right? Some of it because they're just being told that they can't do it, and some people have their eye on, making money off of credit swaps and all this financial madness. But anyway, the point I was getting at is a lot of the cooperatives in the U.S. right now, the worker cooperatives in particular, are too small and undercapitalized to be able to do business like across state borders. So right now there's a lot of mutual training that we do, a lot of mutual exchange that we do, sharing curriculum, sharing materials with each other, but getting to the point where we could actually be supply chains and value chains to each other. That is something I think the most astute amongst us and the most left conscious forces in the cooperative world want to do, but we haven't matured to that level yet. And part of what's also going on, so you have the issue with the credit union. The other thing that has been the second strongest sector of the cooperative world has been this little niche grocery market sector since the 1970s, where I don't know if hippie is there.
Consumer.
A lot of the folks who were striving for alternative lifestyles got into healthy foods and being vegetarian, being vegan, all good things, and organic food. And for a while, they had this kind of niche market, a protected market in the United States where they could grow and thrive, but particularly in white middle-class communities, unfortunately. and that they dominated the cooperative scene. That was the other big thing. But now that the major food chains have converted, and they are, at least in theory, calling themselves organic or have organic sections, they've been basically eliminating that entire section of the cooperative world because they can't compete with the volume of a Walmart, or now the thing that's even scaring Walmart is Amazon just bought Whole Foods last year, and that is bound to change the food world and all of our work on a profound level, we think, a couple years down the road. So it's the aspiration to do so is there. The type of networking organizations and institutions, both on a regional level and a national level, are there. I mean, as we speak right now, some of our comrades are in St. Louis for what's called a Common Bound conference, which is organized by one of these national networks called the New Economy Coalition. So the aim and objective is there. The movement just hasn't grown to a material strength, I think, for us to actually function that way. But that's what many of us are trying to do very deliberately.
Yeah.
How are decisions made in this community, and about finances? How will you make sure that your other than this fundraisers and subscriptions, do you have other sort of financial support? And what about your political affiliation? Does it how is it going there?
You want me to take that, or?
Probably the second part. I was going to say, earlier I talked about being able to have like individual people donate money apart from like applying for grants, and we don't have a lot of grants. We have like a handful that we have. There's membership dues in order to, like I was saying, like try to pool resources together, like within the community, and a lot of people who hear about our work outside of Mississippi, want to donate. A lot of our events, although one of the ways that like community-based organizations like try to get resources is to have events and have like, oh, you pay $5 or whatever. We've actually not really done that to make it accessible to people, but when people come and when we have gatherings, we like pass a hat for donations. So when we launched the organization, there was a whole group of people who helped put on there was a conference, Jackson Rising Conference, New Economies. So that group of people started a coordinating committee for the organization. We have an executive committee of people who really have the time or have made the sacrifice to make the full-time plus time to run the organization, so day-to-day decisions get made by that body. We've been able to kind of create another layer. So that's like a core, and then we have a leadership body of people who are members of the organization and members of the developing cooperatives, and people who are tasked with doing like outreach and membership and base building. And so that's like another circle of expansion of like who's in the organization that's making decisions. And then there's the membership body base from the beginning. Our goal, although we started off with like this core, and that core is still very necessary now, even when we talk about like the threats and the political conditions in Jackson. The goal is to be horizontal and have membership assemblies where members get to propose ideas and really come up with the strategic direction of the organization. So the nonprofit side of our work has a board, but the board, unlike a lot of other nonprofit organizations, the board aren't the ones who set the strategic direction and make like decisions. So yeah, we still have, I think it's fair to say that we still have a long way in terms of incorporating the neighborhood and growing our membership base to include the neighborhood so much to like a mass point where we're having like huge assemblies for that decision making. With the community land trust, the next kind of phase of developing that is increasing the knowledge and awareness of like the first community land trust actually came out of people who were a part of the civil rights movement in Georgia, and like another big part of it is like reclaiming the history of how Black people in the United States have had these set up institutions and had to set up institutions in order to survive. Not only because it was something that is cool to do or something that is like this alternative, right? So, and so the process, like Holly was talking about arts and culture, the process of being able to talk about quality, affordable homes, like what we have in the community, what we don't have in the community. I think the important question is like, so the idea is like going around to different like neighborhood associations, having workshops where we can help politicize like why do we have liquor stores on every corner, and how come you can't walk to a grocery store in our neighborhood? You have to drive like however many 15 minutes or more in order to go to a grocery store to do food shopping, but you can buy beer like at every corner. Like, why is that? Because that's intentional. And then it's like, how do we even move to the point where we're saying, well, what do we want? What do we need? And we have 5 blocks to build what that is, and what is it that people want to see? Because it's not, we can't be making, like a small group of people can't be making those decisions. Another thing that we've done that we're developing more is having transition assemblies. Kali can talk about that a little bit more if we have time, where people are coming. There's a bit of like learning and training, and then there's also an aspect where people can talk about both what the challenges are, what the needs are, what the problem is, and what do we do to address it. And Kali mentioned real quick like build and fight, and for us it's like, yeah, we want to build these alternatives and be self-sufficient and self-sustaining, and at the same time the state is there, capitalism is still there. How do we hold the people who have been elected accountable? How do we hold companies accountable? How do we hold, or even like get the city to disagree with letting some housing developer come and say we're going to make affordable housing, and then 10 years later they don't have to do it anymore. So it's still like a concentrated amount of people who are doing that, and the goal is to actually have a membership-based assembly this year, by the end of the year, and then be able to build that out more. What was the second part?
The political relationship. So I mean, the project started under the leadership of one organization, and myself, Saki, and some other key founders of the organization were once all a part of that organization. We have all since left that organization over primary differences, with how they are interpreting the project, or whether they're even continuing to follow that strategy at all. So
that we've committed to continuing to follow.
So right now it's a period wherein we are very strategically trying to pressure our former comrades. I still consider them comrades. We just don't see eye to eye on a number of different things. the path of which you have chosen is fundamentally a neoliberal path. And in our context, we would also call it a neocolonial path. And so we have to mount a certain level of resistance to stay the course. And so, for instance, unfortunately, since our comrade became mayor of the city, he just won the election last year, there's been 5 people who've been killed by the police under his watch. And he has the theoretical ability to hire and fire the police chief, which controls the police. So, given our history and the what we've built, this should be, from our view, something totally unacceptable. Should not happen. At the least one person should have been enough for there to be a radical overhaul of the police department, and yet. Basically, he hasn't moved. The police officers, we don't know the names of the police officers who've killed people. We only know the identity, really, of 4 of the 5 people who've been killed. They've been withholding that information through some pressure directed from us. He's created a task force, but the task force is not set up to fulfill one of the political objectives that we've had as a part of the plan for over a 15-year period, which was to establish a human rights charter and a human rights commission, which had the power to hire and fire the police that would be independent of the mayor and the city council. This would be an elected position unto itself, so that there would be more freedom and autonomy of that person to make certain judgments. There's been no movement on that. And at this point, we're almost a year into it, that being a core political objective, at least some rhetorical lip service should have been paid to it from our perspective. And it hasn't been. And I surmise that a core piece of what's happening in this regard, and this is what I mean by the neoliberal in particular, if you look at it from this perspective, the police force in Jackson is about 90% black. Again, Saki said the city is over 80% black. And a policeman is one of the most stable and comfortable black middle class jobs that exist in our city. And they form a small voting block that's not inconsequential in our city. And they're tied to some liberal and right-wing churches, right? The police are. And so he, I think, is making him and the folks who are giving him advice and who he's listening to at the moment, unfortunately, they see that as a long-term voting block because they see themselves staying in office over a long period of time or moving to a higher political office and aspiration. And so, if that becomes your orientation, your class allegiance, I would argue, alters profoundly, shifts overnight. Because part of what you're saying is you don't think the working class is in our context anyway, and I would argue to a certain extent the global context, you don't think that the working class is a reliable force to advance democratic aims. And that in order to win elections consistently, you have to tailor towards the middle, you have to tailor toward the petty bourgeois in our case, in order to keep this solid voting block. Because in the United States, that is the class that votes most consistently. The black working class will go like this voting-wise. It will go up and down. And I would argue primarily because there's nothing to vote for. You know what I mean? Like nobody's putting forth a program that speaks directly to their material interests or advancing their material interests. So it's just like, well, this is just more of the same, and so you wind up competing for a narrow strip of the solid electorate, which is not into radical politics. And that is clearly kind of the orientation that I think he's going, and it's still, from our perspective, it's our responsibility and duty to keep advancing this program and to push him not as an enemy, but to push him and say, we know where you're from, we know what, and if you're going to remain true to that, this is what that looks like. So that's where we are. So a little difficult time, but that's where we are.
So,
He has
as
one-
I promised,
one
I
last
just want to
question.
say,
Yeah.
8 p.m., if
Oh, okay.
you are not hostage here. If you really want to see the football game, you're more than welcome. But if you want to continue talking, please by all means. So.
Okay. A little bit longer.
Yeah, thank you. You might now pause the recording for this one.
Sure.
So yeah, I was thinking about like both in theory and in practice with you guys. Then are you prepared to defend yourself, or are you willing to? Or I know it's it's a difficult question because basically you have to take on the biggest military on the world, but
Well,
we're not
strategy on that
prepared
one?
to take on the United States and the level of like what they have and what they can rain down on you. I mean, we
Nobody
come
is
out
except
of
for China,
no one
perhaps.
is. We come out of a black, left like revolutionary black nationalist tradition that believes in self-defense and has always promoted self-defense, and especially in the deep South, and I would say in Mississippi. And so yeah, we wholeheartedly believe in self-defense.
We're going to protect. We're going to. The answer is we're going to protect ourselves
we-
as best we can.
And and protecting yourself, because the state is violent, like period. It's like literally killing and I don't like to compare like the prison industrial complex with like slavery, but it's like basically you're prepared from elementary school and beyond to be a prisoner, and not even like being prepared like back in the days to be a worker, and so yeah, like self-defense is has to be violent if you're being met with violence, right? And I wouldn't even call it violence when you're defending yourself.
But the critical thing, I think, to understand in our context, I think in part to your question, there's a book I would encourage you all to get called Collective Courage. Unfortunately, it's only in English, but it's written by Jessica Gordon Nimhart, and it's about the history of cooperative development in the black community in the United States, basically from the period of enslavement to the present. And one of the key things that's not often directly written or associated with, particularly with the period after Reconstruction, which starts from 1877 and goes roughly to about 1910. That's the great period of lynching in the United States. And one of the things that when you look and you uncover, a large part of this lynching activity was very much associated and targeted at black collective economic enterprise, basically cooperatives and mutual aid societies. And white business class folks using white mass hysteria to go in and eliminate a black farm, or to go to black farmers, or go eliminate and lynch and kill and burn down black grocery stores, or in a couple of cases, black towns, the whole town, just burn them out and kill everybody in the town. Right? There's several towns that I could point you to in the history of the United States that where this happened, not just once. That's a living memory for us, and it's a deep knowledge of, this is what they represent. This is what they will do, and we have not forgotten that. And one of the beauties about living in a place like Mississippi, because the politics of Trump have been the main politics for so long, there's nobody there who's under any illusions that we live in a democracy, right?
I wouldn't say nobody, but
Well, in the
majority of people
end,
don't.
but the majority of people don't. There's no real, we don't confuse going to an election with democracy. It's like they will allow you to do that because it doesn't really change anything, right? Mississippi, they vote highly. We got more black elected officials. So Mississippi, this is like one of the things. Mississippi has 1/4 of all black elected officials in the United States are from Mississippi. Now you would think that, and this has been like over the last 50 years, all right? You would think having that many black elected officials would translate to economic power, some form or fashion. But we still, remember, we're the poorest state in the union that JD brought up. Mississippi is the poorest state in the union, but got more black elected officials than any place else. Just think about that. Let that sit with you for a minute. So the getting elected clearly is not translating to the economic transformation in people's living conditions if this has been going on for 50 years in the most advanced capitalist country in the world, the most advanced, the democracy in the world. So in that sense, what you see is not people voting because they are thinking this is going to translate their material conditions. It's really a vote of self-defense, right? There's different ways and different levels of self-defense. Like, if we're not there, it's the lesser of two evils. If we're not there, then it could be worse. If we're not there mounting some challenge to what the Ku Klux Klan is going to do or what the police are going to do, it could get worse. And so that's a deep resonance within kind of like particularly older black folks. My generation and older, I think there's a much different institutional historical memory that for me, when Obama got elected, was deeply problematic because it signaled that some people were under the illusion that America had changed or was in the process of changing, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing to want it to change to be something better, but there has to be material, indicators that say, well, it is changing. And people from my generation was like, I see no material indication that things are improving for black people. So that's a false hope, a false aspiration that's being projected. And a large part of what Trump is, I think is critical to understand, is that there's been a massive backlash to Obama amongst a certain sector of the white community in the United States. So it's almost like a revenge vote for the last 8 years, quite literally. But to answer your question, I think the critical thing is Saki was saying, self-defense. There's three principles, self-defense, self-respect, and self-determination. Like those are the core principles of the Black Liberation Movement, the radical Black Liberation Movement. And that means, as Malcolm was saying, we're going to defend ourselves by any means necessary. And that's not something you telegraph, particularly not in our U.S. context where, the United States is I think, the thing that it's been brilliant at for a long time, but at least since World War II, we probably have, in so many ways, the most invasive state that has probably ever existed in human history. But they make it seem like it's not. Like the rhetoric and the way that they phrase it, right? They used to talk about, I'm sure you all know the rhetoric better than we do about the totalitarian state. When you go back and you read that criteria, I'm like, we have that. We have this. We have, who are y'all describing? Because I've known this my entire life. But they make it seem like it's elective and you voted for it, and it's madness. But I mean, the core piece of it is that there are a good sector of black folks who understand that capital is not our friend and the state is not our friend. And like I was saying earlier, we anticipate there being reprisal and repression against us. That we under no illusion that they're just going to let us do what we want to do, because they don't want an alternative inspiring other people anywhere.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this goes back to organizing people. A form of self-defense is really is the community, and in the community being able to respond when folks get in trouble, and so that's really this is another reason why building relationships with people and talking to people and knowing who they are and what they care about and engaging in
and what they can
and
do,
developing
what they're willing to do.
solutions is a big part of building that wall of self-defense.
Cool, thanks. I just wanted to hear that you guys are not like total anti-violent or some other bullshit like that. So thank you for this answer.
We don't have that option in our case. We really don't. Now there are pushers and preachers and peddlers of false peace amongst our people. Don't get it wrong. You know, one of the things that we have had to contend with, like there's a formula, basically like the NAACP created in the 1930s that is somewhat hard to break. You know, so typically when a black person gets killed by the police, typically there's spontaneous, or what appears to be spontaneous, outrage by the people, mainly working class people, who will express that by demonstrations or burning shit down, one way or another. And then, what typically happens, the NAACP or some black professional organization will find the family, or the family will reach out to them, and then they will say, you know, stop, don't do that. Let's negotiate.
Go by the legal.
And let's go by the legal and let the courts, you know, figure it out.
Which never goes in our favor.
No, but what happens is the police get exonerated 99.9% of the time. And there's two levels that you file in the United States. So the first is the criminal, and then at the second level is called the civil, right? And so we never win in criminal against the police, because the police are not going to be, you know, the police, you know, have ultimate sovereignty, meaning the right to take life. If sovereignty means nothing else, that's what it means, right? The state has the ultimate right to take life. So they're going to protect that. So the police is not going to ever be challenged. But you have to do that in order to go to the civil process. And then in the civil process, depending on how much, you know, typically the greater the public response, right? The angrier our folks get and demonstrate that, the greater the civil suit is. And the civil suit is how much money the family gets for their loved one being killed. So there's this whole industry, man, which, y'all excuse my French, is just fucked up, that I've spent a whole lifetime, adult lifetime, fighting, you know, like trying to organize families in different cities and places where I live, which is don't follow that script. You know, because no matter how much money they may give you, it doesn't change anything for black people. Like if they know they can keep, for all of us, if they know they can keep doing this, why should they change? You know, why should they ever change the script? You know, so, you know, there's pressures, you know what I mean? But you know, this is part of, I think a deeper thing to understand, that's in part at the heart of your question, is that there's class struggle in everything. There's class struggle in our own community over these issues. And a lot of the people who you always see talking about compromise and peaceful protests and nonviolent this, they are typically coming from a black petty bourgeois orientation, which is its greatest fear, going from that same period. How they interpret being burnt out and burnt to the ground is different than how working class people interpret being burnt out and burnt to the ground, right? You know, and that's their greatest fear is, you know, don't have the army come and you know,
make it worse. Oh.
When for black working class people, like the army's here every day. You live in a better part of town, so you don't feel it in the same way I feel it. But that army's here, you know, with his boot on my neck every single day. So I'm saying, you know, I don't think the masses of black people have any illusions about what it's going to take to change things in the United States. I really don't. Now, whether people believe we can build the force to change it is another question. That takes high levels of organization, which about maybe 3 or 4 periods in our history, the last 150 years, we've kind of gotten to that point. But each time we get to that point, the state meets it with intense violence.
And infiltration.
And we are beginning to be in a phase kind of like that now. So that's why, for instance, since Trump got elected, white supremacist groups, and there's a whole plethora of them in the United States, people who are just outright Nazis, to the Klan, to skinheads, and everything in between. Like, they've killed about 30 people in the United States, and only 2 of them have been prosecuted. But last year, the FBI didn't say that they were the threat. They said that the greatest threat to the country were black identity extremists. Black identity extremists, which is the new way of them advancing a term targeting the movement for Black lives. Because, you know, the same, J. Edgar Hoover said the same thing in 1968 against the Black Panther Party. But that was organized in a much different way than how the younger generation organized, which is much more horizontal. So you can't target individual leadership in the same way, which is somewhat of an advance on our movement. You can't target leadership in the same way you did in the 1960s. So the advance in their thinking by this new designation is actually a response to the current movement. So they're not saying we're not targeting black political organizations. They wouldn't say that in the same way they said in the 60s. We're targeting black identity extremists, which means we don't know what the definition of that is. Nobody does. It's purely at their discretion. And it could be any individual. So you don't have to be affiliated with anything to be targeted by this new political designation that the Trump administration has come under. But, you know, so one of the things that I know I've been doing in different ways is, you know, good or bad, a lot of this younger generation, under 30, they really haven't been exposed to the intense level of political repression that I, for instance, at my age, was at the very kind of tail end of and saw with my own eyes. They didn't live through that. And so now they're kind of like, wait a minute, you know, all our people are being harassed by the FBI, we're being targeted everywhere, they're sending people to infiltrate our organizations. And so my generation is like, yeah, this is what they do, this is what they've always done. Now learn the lessons from our generation. Y'all thought we were crazy or paranoid before. Now you got to learn the reality of how the state actually functions and what it is.
I mean, I would say that, like, there is a place for like a tactic of non-violent action. Yeah. And at the same time, like, we don't call them riots when the community decides to demonstrate to fight back and to challenge, like, even physically the police that are present, and to burn, like, businesses in the neighborhood. Like, that's a rebellion, and, like, rebellion is necessary, right? So was there anything?
Yeah, but you don't, you know, just the last thing is, you know, to be clear. In our case, you have to press for we got to exhaust all the democratic, I would argue, we got to exhaust all the democratic means available in the space that's available. Because, you know, I think it's somebody, maybe you said it, you know, people need to be clear all over the world how vicious the United States government is. That ain't just something that Trump created. The United States government always been vicious. Always. It's a settler colonial piece. That means that entity got created by wiping out an entire group of people.
Yeah,
right? That's its foundation.
They'll use drones.
They'll use anything.
On us,
you know, so
as much as anybody.
Yeah, so, you know, we got to exhaust every means available to us, first and foremost, with the clear knowledge that these are genocidal maniacs that are on the other side of this equation. You know, and like Gandhi, I see a picture of Gandhi and King, you know, up here. You know, but there's a quote from Kwame Ture, as many people might know from Stokely Carmichael, you know, which says, look, you got to have somebody who has a moral conscience on the other side to use moral suasion as an argument. And if they don't have no consciousness, your tactic falls on deaf ears. Right? And that's the critical thing that we got to get people to understand. Use it to the best of your ability, a large part of it, I always think, is how do we get our own people to overcome their own fear? Because, the black people live in a constant state of fear in the United States. It may be subtle, but that is an inbred piece of our existence around, what the hell these crazy white people are going to do today. Might be a good day. I might be in the casket. She might be in the casket. That's just a present reality. If I, look at a policeman wrong, or he just having a bad day, and I ain't got to be doing nothing else but just being black, and it could be all over for me. That's the reality I've had to live with for 46 years.
Questions, comments?
What do you think about Black Lives Matter movement? So, what's your opinion on them?
There's like two. There's like movement for Black Lives and then Black Lives Matter.
Well, let me redirect it in a particular way. The Black Liberation Movement goes in cycles, ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And what is being called the Movement for Black Lives is part of an up, right? And I welcome any and every up in the struggle that comes along. I think Black Lives Matter, the concept and everything of it, was a very critical intervention in the internal operations of the black community. I think its greatest strength has been challenging the black community to reorient itself around certain questions. And what this generation has done under the guise of the Black Lives Matter thing, hashtag or mantra, whatever, is they put women and queer folks, LGBT folks, at the center of the discussion within the black community about who and what the black community is and should be. So its greatest impact, in my view, has been that, right? Because it's a different political space. Now the feminist movement, black people have always had some element of a feminist movement, so it's not like it's something particularly new, but it was always on the margins of the black liberation movement. Even the black left in the 1960s and 70s, it would be like an add-on, and then there's, black liberation, and then it was like an add-on. Now, that's not a reality that young folks kind of accept. There's much more what we call, which comes from a generation of black feminists from the 1980s, called intersectionality, and having an intersectional analysis, and that being kind of front and center. So that internal piece is still growing in the black community and the black liberation movement. Since Trump came in, however, its actual social impact has declined. It's declined. And again, I think it goes back in part to just relate. Trump does not, and the forces that he represents, they don't have a moral compass relative to black struggle which says, I will listen to you, and your opinion is valid. Obama, despite all of his flaws and faults, had that. And so he responded, to control things, not to necessarily change things, but he at least responded by, let's have another conversation about race, or let's blah, blah, blah. Trump and them, they're just like, burn something this time, and I'm going to fully send the drones and the Army, Navy, and Marines after your ass. And it's not just like when I said the movement decline. It's been basically, I think folks had to reflect on, well, what tactics do we use now? Because the state now is not going to respond the way it did last year, or the way it did 2016. And everybody's clear.
Is like electoral policy.
Yeah, everybody's clear on that. Like they just not going to respond in the same way. This group will bring the hammer, and that's the first thing that they're going to bring. Ain't going to be no negotiation. So, just imagine. So one of the things that was starting to happen and started to build up, folks were doing direct action at a lot of airports and intersections and things of that nature. Particularly towards the end, the beginning of 2016 through the middle of 2016. And I know I raised a caution to some of the folks I know about the airport piece in particular, because airports are part of federal jurisdiction, not a local jurisdiction. And any action there automatically puts you into the U.S. terror designation. So this is under Obama. I would say, hey, wait a minute. Not that I don't think that's, a good thing to do, but y'all need to make sure that the young folks who are taking action clearly understand the legal implications of what they're getting involved in, and they're making a sound decision, because that could put somebody your age in prison for the rest of their life. And they didn't know, a lot of people like, y'all better let them folks who crossing that line across the street, they better know that. Because you don't want to have, we get our movement has about 200 political prisoners since the 1960s. They're still in jail, right? Most of them ain't gonna never get out of prison, unfortunately. They're gonna die there. And so, do you want to? I was like, do y'all want? We don't need another couple of thousand people rush into that because they didn't know what they were doing. Because that doesn't make for a sound political prisoner. Like somebody be in court arguing, yes, judge, your system is rotten. They're going to be please, because they didn't understand what they was getting into, and still be thrown with the book. So, in that sense, I think there was a wise step back by the movement at large, which it seems like the momentum's kind of slowed down, but you got to understand who your enemy is and what the tactics and what they are. And I think the movement right now is trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Where I've been critical is where a segment of the movement has gone to is into electoral politics as the answer. And there's a lot of money from the Democratic Party driving them that way, right? Saying, you got to elect more Democrats, and then it'll change the balance of power in the country, more towards your favor. And my argument is no, actually it will not. There was a reason why this movement erupted under a Democratic president, because clearly he wasn't and could not meet the objective demands of our people himself, nor could when Obama came in, there was a Democratic House and Senate. Okay, so he didn't really have the excuse that I was just faced with opposition the whole time. That's actually not true. So, my thing to a lot of the younger folks, what is our actual program outside of electoral politics? What is our actual program? And just trying to get people to think on that on a deeper level. Like, you got to be building something, that's going to take you beyond voting in another person, in the office, who's only more than likely going to be able to institute another neoliberal program and another neoliberal program. It's like, we got to have something outside of that. And so my concern right now for the movement is that because one of the what's the old saying I want to use? There's a brilliance and a naivete to being young, right? Is sometimes when you're young, you don't know actually what really to fear, and that can be a beautiful thing. Is you just fight everything, right? But then there's some shit you just really need to be afraid of, and not so that it stops you, but at least you understand, if I take this action, then it's going to be real. Am I ready to go there? And hopefully the answer is yes, right? But a lot of people, if you don't get psychologically prepared, you step out there, then when you see what the enemy is really willing to do, you collapse real quick, right? So it's like, understand your enemy, think wisely, prepare for all outcome scenarios, but I think that the thing that I'm concerned about is that they are being they're being channeled into very narrow political action, which after Trump, whatever happens, like their focus the next 15 to 20 years will be so consumed by electoral politics that they'll stop doing the organizing and the building work in the community. It's actually going to build power. So that's my concern with BLM. I love what it's doing internally in our community, but there are some things that I hope that from my generation to the generation previously, that they take more serious about how you actually organize people and build power, and to what end are you doing this for. Not to say I'm against electoral politics. Obviously, I helped the mayor get elected, but you got to be very clear what you're doing with that, right? And to be very clear, that's not going to solve the problems. At most, it might create enough space for the social movement to do some things. But the social movement, I would argue, has to be in command, not the politicians.
Thanks.
Anything you wanted to add on?
No, I'm just gonna do the time check.
What would be your advice to find these capitalist values which are being always promoted? I should care about myself. If I don't have any problem, it's okay. I'm okay. I don't have to care about others and stuff like this. This is what makes people are divided and nobody cares much. And how to make people more socially oriented other than individually oriented.
I think that's different in every country. I think that's different in every country.
Every country?
I think that's different in every country.
What would be your...
From what I know, what little I know about Hungary, y'all in a tough situation. Y'all in a very tough situation.
I think demonstrating what taking care of each other looks like, and having people because it doesn't feel like, even if that's the mindset, it doesn't feel good. And so, yeah, I think demonstrating it, and then I think if we are able to, it's a cultural shift that needs to happen, and I think that doing things like trying to work on solidarity economy type of things helps to make space for people to see that there's another way to relate to each other, that then can I think actually have people feel better and be inspired to work together. And yeah, it's hard. That's an issue and a struggle, I would say, for us and our community, because what's been taught over and over and over again is a family-based lifting up, not a community-based lifting up. And people have been satisfied with being able to get themselves out of the ghetto without necessarily being concerned about who gets left behind, or doing charity work instead of really trying to make large scale institutional system change. But I think that the more that even little things collectively can be done, that can develop into bigger and bigger things.
One of the things, it seems to me, from just a deeper. I've been paying it since the last time I was here. Been trying to pay as much attention to politics here as possible, because it's very clear. Hungary is right now a global testing ground in a lot of ways. Urban is a model for Trump in a lot of fundamental ways, which he has said. He's openly said that on at least 3 occasions. Trump has said that he's been following what Urban is doing and how he's moving and studying and his political forces studying, and it's not by any accident that Milo and Bannon and all these other folks have been coming this way and trying to get an audience, this way and forming alliances. Bannon had actually been here before Trump got elected. I don't know if y'all knew that, but some of the research on our side had picked that up, that he had been here and met with a number of different folks from both the right-wing part, from the 2 dominant right-wing parties here. So anyway, to me, it seems like there's the left has to find a collective narrative which is not nationalist, that can speak to the aspirations, I think primarily, as I understand it, speak primarily to folks who live in the smaller towns in the countryside in Hungary, and not just in the urban centers. Because that seems to be where they are most strongly concentrated in, just like Trump in our area. In the cities, he will lose hand down. There's no audience, almost any city in the United States. But the way our political system is structured in that country, the actual majorities don't count, right? The more concentrated you are, the actually less power to a certain extent you have, because it's based on this broad representative dynamic. And Trump's team understood that perfectly and played it. And it seems to be in Europe and in parts of Latin America, that same dynamic around how these bourgeois states are structured is now starting to favor, these electoral decisions. Colombia just had the same thing with their just election that happened the other day, where the real thing that turned the tide against the left in Colombia was the rural areas, which many people thought that didn't make any sense. It was like, well, actually, that's where most of the fight against where the state took the fight, to the left, to the FARC, and where basically the death squad just had free reign. So like people experienced the conflict in the rural areas in the way the people in the urban areas didn't. So they have a different orientation to what the war is and how it should be viewed, right? And I think that's the dynamic of this. I agree with Samir Amin, who's been doing a lot of writing on this, of late, about the lingering process of the urban rural periphery in all of our politics becoming, all throughout the globe, becoming more acute. And I think that's something that seems to me here that has to be paid attention to. So like, how do you construct a conversation that encourages people to see the broader democratic, need for people in Hungary to have a better way of life, but that not being opposed to migrants coming in, not being opposed to, folks either to the east or to the west, right? And seeing folks in solidarity. But I think I think in this phase, whether we like it or not, in the left, there's a certain aspect of what we would call kind of identity politics that you're just not going to get around. Because I think that this is a phase of capitalism wherein it's just fragmenting everything so much that there's a tremendous set of contradictions that we all are facing. On the one hand, everything is telling us to be more and more individualistic, as you were saying, but we find ourselves being more and more socially isolated at the same time and not finding meaning in the individual consumption. And then our living conditions are going down at the same time for most of us. And so people are grasping at religion and grasping for things that actually provide some kind of collective, if simple solution. And we don't have that on the left, to a certain extent. Like, we don't have that, a narrative that makes people feel part of a collective outside of our own notion of like the proletariat, which doesn't exist in the way, there's still a working class. I ain't one of the people who said the working class. The working class is actually larger now than ever been in history, but it's not organized, in this way anymore. You know what I'm saying? It still exists, but it's not organized in this collective way anymore. So how do we speak to people in a different way that speaks to the totality of their experience, not just somebody who, labors all the day? Because one of the things that I think is brilliant that capitalism kind of figured out on a certain level, I'm trying to think of the commercial, which I know that you guys probably have. I can't think of it right now. But one of the things I think that they figured out, which they also created, but most of us don't want to work. Truth be told. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm going to get up and go, clock in for 8 hours. So the system's been able to exploit that, and say, hey, here's all those things that get you to think about not being work. When we all know, I think from our perspective, work is a transformative element of being human. But that don't mean we want to do it for 16 hours a day, right? And so, like, how do we make that appeal? It's like, your work is something that actually gives you and gives society meaning. Like, we got to create a way to flip that back on its head, as opposed to being like drudgery. Like, man, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to wake up and do X, Y, and Z. But make it be like, hey, I'm going, I'm happy to wake up and go to work, and my work be fulfilling and not even feel like work.
4 hours.
Yeah, for 4 hours or whatever the situation is, right? I think we got to figure some things out, but I don't think right now in this phase you're going to get past a certain kind of identity politics. So that's what I'm saying. Like, how do you create a kind of a people narrative that's not nationalistic? And I think that's a serious trick. When y'all figure that out, let us know, because we trying to figure it out too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering like what you all's thoughts are for what can be done, like what kind of space can be made now, if any, and like what do you need to do to capture people? Like, are there things that are happening that offer some ideas, I guess?
Well, I think here what united the rural majority that got the results of this election now is, a common fear of a common enemy that was created. And I think the first step to be able to unite and identify a different kind of unity and different kind of common identity is to break this first one down. Like, that's a lie. This common enemy should not unite us because it's a lie. It's not existing. So I think it's like a zero step that needs to happen with. I think it needs to happen through personal experience, because I don't think there's anyone who would, meet people who are in need, who are fleeing, to share some kind of common experience, and then at the end of the day still say that I'm afraid of you and I don't want you here and I would do anything to not have you here. But I have no idea how to make that happen on a large scale. Yeah. But that's what when I meet people who voted the way they did, and I'm surprised, and I was like, how could you? Well, I'm afraid. And then I never even realized that that's what makes them vote that way. Fear, it's like a primal fear.
It's being used everywhere.
But I don't know how that can be translated to your situation. It's just something that I think it's common here.
Fear is the driving motivation for white supremacy in the United States. And it's like, when have we ever actually posed a threat to the United States project. You know, typically, even when we've had great success, we've tried to get as far away from that entity as possible. So it's like, you know, this kind of white fear of black people and black bodies.
I think
It's
it's
totally
just
irrational.
losing what they have, you know, that
Yeah,
they're
big
losing
experience.
power.
Yeah.
But I mean, so one of the things that in our case, for instance, that we have been trying to figure out is also how do you break down a narrative of, you know, particularly with like in where we live in Mississippi. The white people are just as poor as the black people.
Majority.
The majority. They're just as poor as the black people. But there's something about being white which just makes you feel a little bit better, you know, or at least I'm not like you, or at least I'm not, you know, and then I can take a certain collective action against you because you're black that I won't get state reprisal for. But like we're trying to like, look, you can hate me all you want. I'm not actually even trying to change your mind. The reality of the situation is you broke and hungry like me. Like, let's deal with that. And why are we broke and hungry? When neither one of us own nothing. You know, like you own dirt, like I own dirt. You know what I mean? So we trying to figure out how do you have that. Because I think that, I'm saying that because a part of this whole notion that it was the white working class that got Trump elected, that's partially an outright lie. I mean, y'all should know that. That's a large extent, that's an outright lie. It was primarily white people in the suburbs who voted Trump in. The white working class, basically the same thing the black working class is. They stayed their ass home. They didn't vote. They really didn't vote. Trump got less votes than Mitt Romney got votes in 2014. Right? And Hillary got less votes than I think than her husband did when he last ran in 1996 or something like that. So people just didn't vote. They just stayed home. So there's this whole notion that in the media, like, oh, the white working class is this and this thing. It's got problems, but don't lie on it. You know, that's one of the things, like, let's have a serious analysis of what the problems are. And are there white folks who feel scared about their living standards declining? Absolutely they are. Right? But we saw that with the Occupy movement. So there is another, my point of view, there is another response to that can be marshaled from our side of the equation, right? It's hard sometimes to get it to stick, but I think it's there.
And it's hard to get people to sit down and even do something like be social from different backgrounds, right? And I think if it starts out even on a small scale, then it's a model. And so it seems like there's opportunity for like young people to be able to relate to other young people who are like migrants or immigrants or from wherever they are, to be able to demonstrate that, you know, that fear isn't necessary and that there's actually some like common things that if it was done, it would improve everybody's lives.
Could I ask, so this is something I was thinking about since we've been here, and we're going to have to go in a minute. This as an idea, and y'all can take it and accept it, but right now it seems like Urban's got too much of a grip on a direct confrontation about the migrant question. That's my read. But what if there could be some type of festival and exchange that was consistent with bringing in folks from Africa and Southwest Asia who are actually citizens of the EU, and bring them here and do well televised public events, right, about the issues from folks from those countries experience. because it flips the narrative. Like if you're scared of these people, some of these people are already here in Europe and been here in Europe, right? And he can't claim that they're migrants, right? Because they have EU status, the folks that you would bring over. And do some very things that are like public. It would maybe like just a small group like you all, and just do a lot of social media exposure about it happening and coming and what the kind of like and part of the purpose is, and not make it be explicit, but like I'm giving aid to migrants or refugees, which they can politically target, but being about, hey, we want to have an intercultural exchange with people from the regions who are Europeans, but who are from the regions where the migrants are coming from, about the experience that they have. I think that could like totally just fuck up part of their narrative if done loudly, boldly, and consistently enough. Because it's like they got the legal protection to be here, at least for the time being. They can come in and out because of Shenzhen, fairly easily, right? They won't be under a certain amount of threat and pressure. You can do some media stuff about it. And they can speak to their own issues and be an indirect voice to those who are being silenced. It's not direct. So sometimes we can't fight our enemy directly. So it's just something I was thinking about, making a suggestion
something
about
culturally and
something,
fun.
like culturally, but just totally remove that floor from the conversation about these are people that you need to be somehow afraid of or scared of, and show that interaction, however small it is, and find, social media and all that stuff, the way to project it. And then, after maybe about a year or something like that, have some articles and debates around, like, why are we afraid? What are we afraid of? What is there to fear? Because we've demonstrated that people can gather across cultures, across continents, but we've already demonstrated that, right? And anyway, you play with it.
The question
but
could be what, like,
there's some idea.
yeah. I mean, the question of what do we have to fear has to come, I think, be introduced, like, from the start.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm saying introduce that because
Yeah.
have the focus of the conversation be about what is to fear.
Yeah.
But like once you demonstrate that the folks have got together
Yeah.
and it's all been cool, then I'm just suggesting
Yeah.
the year after
You
that,
start
then you
that
launch a
part of-
major campaign
Yeah.
back,
Right.
directed towards Hungarians, not
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
what do we have to fear as a very explicit campaign that you launching, you looking at doing over a 2 to 3 year period.
Yeah, and storytelling around what, I don't know what they are, but like, what are some of the common experiences that people can relate to?
Yeah.
That were shared by other groups, and yeah, like using media to be able to tell that story and create like a different narrative.
And you can,
I think that's a good idea.
and you can do a very strong anti-capitalist narrative about, what their fears are about leaving and why they had to leave. War and economic displacement, which is the same thing people in the countryside are fearing, right? That would in their own ways and form, about the cost of living increasing and their wages ain't going and getting no higher. I think just what the commonality is of saying, look, there's some universal experiences that we all have by virtue of just being human, and they try to break it down on that level.
I could just comment on that and make it into a question somehow. I think part of the problem in Hungary on the migrant issue is that there aren't the migrants in Hungary, and there are a couple of myself as well, but the government itself says there's around 3,000 people with refugee status in the whole country, 10 million. Most of the refugees that are here, they leave. But this migrant thing has been invented by the state and by the Fidesz party and is by the controlled media to scare people, as she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter whether there's migrants or not. It really does not matter. So it's a complete fiction. It's just the fear. And the fear is very real. People get freaked out. I mean, it's really bizarre. But this idea that you guys had is a good one. In some ways, it's already been tried for many years.
Okay.
But I'll tell you my analysis of why it didn't work. And you were talking about your organization and how you're making it political, not necessarily a political party you want to get elected, but making it political, empowering people, etc. But these attempts have been done by NGOs, often funded by the EU or other funding, and it's depoliticized. It's like, can't we all get along, right?
Yeah.
You know this phrase. And when you take away the politics and you take away the empowerment, and you just have this message of, let's all love each other, people say this is bullshit, or they get bored and walk away.
Right.
And I don't know how to make that issue, especially in this environment now, especially since yesterday it's now a criminal offense, to make that actually work. I mean, I think the universal message of, we're all humanity and we have to struggle against the ruling classes, I think that's my message, but it's not necessarily very popular in Hungary. So. There's a question in there somewhere, I don't know.
How is Fidesz and folks actually framing, what's their economic rhetoric and program right now, concretely?
Supporting families.
Supporting?
They are supporting families, that's why they are popular, because they support families more. That's why Fidesz is more popular.
Propaganda, they are supporting families.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what we're asking. Like, what is the propaganda?
if you have
that they're-
three or more children, you get much less taxes, you get more money and stuff like this. So people on the countryside get more children.
So
They are happy with
No,
you have to if you have like 3 or more children and if you earn enough money. That's the kind of way to support.
That's a really complicated thing.
Mm.
There's a narrative. There's been a narrative for the last 8 years about families before multinational companies, but it's mostly a narrative and not a reality.
Yeah.
At least it doesn't work. We can all agree on that one.
Well, yeah.
But you agree that they've effectively created a narrative of family before multinationals. Would you all agree on that?
Yeah, and they have this anti-migrant propaganda and also the anti-EU propaganda while they are serving the interests of the big EU companies and stuff. And yeah, I think these are also very important points.
They're also pushing too much Christianity and all the topics around that.
Yeah, and they also have this white supremacy propaganda hidden not so deep. I mean, they don't say that white people are better than anyone explicitly, but it's in their agenda.
I mean, they don't say that, but they say, but Hungary is for white people only, basically.
Well, they had a campaign against George Soros. Hungary's actual narrative is like a conspiracy theory, so I think we're unique in that one. But the whole Soros campaign, okay, now you guys see me, but the whole Soros campaign was like a very subtle way to play the let's blame the Jew game, so it's like that kind of subtle, it's subtle, but everybody knows that, it's against the Jews, so.
Basically, Fidesz has a narrative, and the fake leftist opposition doesn't have a narrative against them, and I think that's one of the biggest problems here. More than 2 million people voted for Fidesz, and they are the majority. And